we're going to continue our flight through some of the Old Testament because the last three lessons are based in the New Testament, but kind of set of lessons going forward that will help us, I think, to see some things when we get to the New Testament. Today's lesson is the birth of Moses. Now, everybody in here I know is old enough to have seen Charlton Heston in the movie about the plagues of Egypt. Didn't do very much back then about the birth of Moses, but there was just about 2 minutes for that, and that's about all that God spends in the Testament about the birth of Moses. But there's some stuff to be gathered from that, and I think a couple of the lessons are pretty good. We're in Exodus 2. Exodus 2. Now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, of course, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus, a basket for him, and coated it with tar and pitch. Then they placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." For the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she became his son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Okay, let's sort of go over this. When you open your book to Exodus 1, what does it say at the top? Does it say something about the second book of Moses? Is that what yours says? Huh? Many of the titles in the King James versions titled the first 5 books, the first book of Moses, the second book of Moses, and it's sort of on that wise that they were given to us because Moses wrote the words for these, and the Septuagint, which was the translation of the Hebrew into the Greek, maintained that at the top of their writings, that it was the second book from the hand of Moses. Okay? Exodus wasn't called Exodus. It didn't get called Exodus until after 1400. Isn't that odd? Okay? It was the second book of Moses. So Moses wrote all this stuff down. In Exodus, the 2nd chapter, says, in really sort of a matter-of-fact kind of way. Now, there was a man who was a Levite, and he married a Levite woman, and they became pregnant. Pretty easy. You expect a Levite to marry a Levite woman, and if they had children, you'd expect them to have them. And she gave birth to a son. Now, this is after Exodus 1, where it talks about how the Hebrews were Egypt. And Pharaoh said, well, we need to be shrewd about this. Okay? We'll put them off over in one area and we'll work them. We'll work them until they just can't do no more. And that didn't work to get rid of the men because they were stout. And so he said, well, we're just going to make them kill the males. Now, does that sound like anything you heard from the New Testament? Right? Herod, when he found out that there was somebody coming out of Bethlehem, said, we're going to kill all the firstborn. We're going to kill all the males out of Bethlehem for a couple of years. And they did that. So it's not an uncommon practice. Pharaoh had heard from a diviner, that there was going to be coming somebody who was going to make the Israelites rise up against him. Okay? And so he was going to make sure that the males were decimated. Okay? If you remember back in Genesis 46, 47, 48, 49, and the end of the book 50, I talked about Joseph and what great things he had done. Okay? Remember that Joseph was one of the 12, and he was sold by his brothers into slavery to go to Egypt. And in Egypt, because of his ability to interpret dreams, he was given the prominence, and then he was given another task and given more prominence. And then finally, somebody pointed out to the Pharaoh that there was a man who could interpret dreams, and Pharaoh said, well, bring him to me. And Joseph told him what was going to happen, and they went about putting all the corn together so that there wouldn't be a famine during the 7 years that the predicted famine occurred. Joseph was given all kinds of power. And so Pharaoh said, go and get your family. And he went back to get them out of Canaan because they were suffering in the same drought, the same famine. Remember that they carried, it says, 66 out of Joseph's family, plus Joseph, his wife, and the 2 sons that he had at the time, for a perfect 70. Remember, 70 is one of those perfect numbers because it's 7 times 10. Okay? 7 times 10. It became a perfect number. Certainly, there were more than 70 people in Joseph's family because this just counted all of Joseph, his 12 brothers, their 12 wives, their sons, their daughters. Didn't count any of their slaves, didn't count any of their servants, okay? Because Abraham, whenever he made his journey, he had 318. So you know good and well that the numbers didn't dwindle. So they probably went into Egypt with over 200, okay? Not just the sons and daughters of Jacob or of Israel. There were that many plus. But the 70 number is what they've recorded, and that's because they're first-degree relatives. Out of that, people have said, well, how in the world could they have so many people? This is 430 years. Now, doubling the size of a population occurs about somewhere between 22 and 25 years, you double the population. Okay? And that's currently. The way they populated back then, they were popping them out. Okay? They were really having lots of babies. So you would expect in 20 generations, that they would have doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled. You know that old joke about, would you rather have $1 million or a penny that's doubled every day? Everybody wants to take the penny, right? Okay. Well, that's exactly the same sort of thing for Joseph and his family. They were doubling so quickly that whole Goshen was filled with Israelites, and they were taking them forcefully and bringing them into the workforce of Egypt to do all the projects that Pharaoh had. he was working them day in and day out, huge numbers. In fact, in all of the tombs and writings and pictographs that they have on all of the statues of the time, they show that the Israelite slaves were working in mostly a loincloth, all year long. Because in Egypt, does it get hot in Egypt? Huh? They had lots of air conditioning right then, didn't they? Yeah. The southern wind, when it came, that was the air conditioning they had. The winds from the south, that was all. So they lost a lot of men just by being out there working with very little food and water. Yet still, the number of Israelite men was over 600,000. Okay? And that's just the Israelite men, not the Israelite men slaves, not the Israelite women, not the Israelite children. So the number of people that Moses took out whenever he left Exodus, when he left in the Exodus in Egypt, was probably somewhere close to 2 million. 2 million. Think about how it would look to take all the city of Dallas and move them to Texarkana. Yeah, there wouldn't be a single plant between Dallas and Texarkana that wasn't disrupted by the feet, if nothing else, And all the food. So there was a lot of stuff being moved in the Exodus. Now, we're not talking about the Exodus yet, but I'm just wanting you to know that whenever Joseph took his 66 brothers and sisters and children into Egypt, and they doubled and they doubled and they doubled, there was millions of Israelite people there doing the work for Pharaoh. That's why he made this decree: we're going to kill all these boys. So the Levite woman, whose name is not given here, but is given further over in Exodus 6, Jochebed. Okay? Amram was the dad. Amram and Jochebed were the father and mother of Moses, biologically. And she saw that he was a fine child. Now this fine child, this was his face. Okay? He was pretty. He was a pretty boy. When you looked at him, you said, "Oh man, it's a pretty boy." Okay? That's what that term meant. And she hid him for 3 months. Now, why did she only hide him for 3 months? Well, if you had a baby, people knew that you were pregnant, And when you suddenly don't look pregnant anymore, people are going to start talking. Well, even in a community the size of 2 million, there's somebody around there. The Egyptians are around taking notice of who's underneath their care. So if she suddenly became unpregnant and didn't see the child, didn't hear about her giving the child to the Nile like she was supposed to, okay, somebody would have heard. And you sort of can't hide a baby, because what do? They eat, they poop, and they cry. And that's about it. Eat, poop, cry, and sleep. That's all the babies do. So at 3 months, she couldn't keep him quiet any longer because she had to keep feeding him. And she, just like all the rest of the Israelites, had a job to do. They made everybody work, not just the men. The women worked too. So she could hide him no longer. She got a basket for him. Now, mine says Papyrus, okay? But what does yours say? Does anybody have an ark? Does anybody's Bible say ark there? In verse 3 says ark. The term that's used there in the original language is ark. Okay? So how many arks do we know about in the Bible? Noah's ark, right? And this ark next ark that comes up in the Bible is the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? That's all the arks that I know about. Ark, a very special basket, something to keep something shrouded and protected in. And this was made out of papyrus. Now, papyrus was a very unusual plant. It was grown in exceeding numbers along the entire upper reaches of the Nile Delta, and it was used when it was dried and put together properly. It was used for a place to write on. Okay, but it was also used to make shoes. It was used to make baskets. It was used to make cords. It was used to make rope. Okay, it was a very strong linen type plant. Okay, it had lines in it that could be aligned and could be latticed so that it would stay stronger. Okay, and that's the reason why it was used for all these things. And now it says it was coated with tar and pitch. Now in Egypt they didn't have the bitumen, which is the pitch. Okay, that was the stuff that was used in making good mortar to bring the buildings together, to make them sticky, to push together. Okay, and it was a very strong pitch, and it kept things watertight. So this ark was made out of papyrus and was coated with tar and pitch, and that made it watertight. It could float. Okay. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Isn't it interesting that the Red Sea is actually, in their language, it's the Reed Sea. It's not red. The Reed Sea. And it was called the Reed Sea because of all the seaweed in it. Seaweed could have been same word for reed and seaweed and the papyrus all came from the same root. Word studies are really interesting. I've got to tell you, you just got to look at all of them. And the reeds, where the basket was, were the same kind of reeds that the stuff was made out of. So it was very easy to conceal. You would have had to hear the baby. Okay, which is apparently what the slave of Noah's daughter did. She heard the child. They saw it, but they heard it. They came over to it and opened up the basket, and they saw the child, and the child was crying. Oh, now, let's talk about Pharaoh's daughter. Why was she down here? If you were the daughter of Pharaoh, the highest person in the land is your daddy, why are you down washing in the mud? Everybody, come on now. They worshiped the Nile. Okay, the Nile River was the giver of life. The Nile River gave them everything they needed. Okay, the gods, Ra and all them, came through the Nile to the Egyptians on their golden boats. Okay, came down out of the heavens and landed on the Nile. They came up the Nile. The Nile was everything. So they worshipped the Nile, and they felt like the Nile was where health and wealth and prosperity came from. Okay? Health, wealth, and prosperity came from the Nile. And so, if you were Pharaoh's daughter, you went to part of the Nile to bathe for your health. It's like going to the spa, ladies. Any of you go to the spa? You gotta go down and get your health done at the spa. Well, I don't know how much that really works, but that's what they believed. They were going to go to the Nile. Okay? Now, what you may or may not know is what are found in the Nile. Are there dangers in the Nile? Everybody? Huh? everybody says crocodiles. That's the first thing everybody thinks of. But at the lip of the Nile, the brink of the Nile, the most dangerous thing there were sharks. Sharks. You know, they found a shark in the Mississippi River 800 miles up the Mississippi River. 8-foot long tiger shark was found 800 miles up the Mississippi. So sharks in big rivers were not uncommon when they came directly out of the sea. At the brink of the Nile, sharks readily were available. And sharks would eat crocodiles. Okay? Big battles between sharks and crocodiles back then. So this was an area that was cordoned off. Okay? Pharaoh's men had made sure that this area was an area where the daughters of Pharaoh could come and bathe and get their healing done and be safe. Okay? They carried big spears and stuff out there so that they made sure that it was a safe place. Now, Amram and Jochebed apparently knew because they came to this place to put their basket in. They sort of knew, since they served in Pharaoh's house, they knew where this place was going to be and at what time of the day she would come. So they had an inside on all of this. Okay? Do you think God knew when this was all going to come about? Yeah. I sort of have a feeling that God knew all this stuff too. And made sure that Amram and Jochebed got the inside by being in the household so that they could have the knowledge to go at the right place. It's all. God puts it all together so perfectly. Okay? And among the reeds they saw it, and the child was crying, and she felt sorry for him. Now, there's another thing that you need to know. In the Egyptian service for the dead, they have a line in there that says that you were accepted into their heaven. You were accepted into their heaven because you were not one who failed to suckle the young. Okay? So everybody had to read that at the funeral for one of the Egyptians. That was one of their things that they read, and you were always ready to suckle the young. And this is one of the Hebrew babies said, well, shall I go get a Hebrew woman to nurse her for you? You know, you weren't going to nurse her because you hadn't been pregnant, right? I mean, you couldn't nurse if you hadn't been pregnant. Okay? So they got this woman to be the wet nurse for this baby, and it turns out to be the child's mother. Huh. I think God had a hand in that too, right? Yeah, pretty much. We've got this whole thing coasting downhill now. Who is this girl? Oh, it's Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh, the one that said, we're going to kill all these Egyptian boys. So the daughter of the man who said kill them all takes one of them home to him. Right? Yay, God. I mean, he sort of got everything painted right into his corner because he's going to be the giver, the deliverer of the Israelites. Yes, go, she said. And the girl went to get the baby's mother. Take this baby and nurse him, and I will pay you. Not only did she get to nurse her own baby, but she got paid for it. Okay? She got the double treat. So now she kept the baby until he was older, and then she took him to Pharaoh's daughter and gave him to him. Now, about how long was that? In those days, it was not uncommon to nurse a child until they were 5 or 6. Not uncommon at all. In fact, even today in Mexico, you can find mothers who nurse their children until they're 5. They may nurse 3 children at the same time. Now, they're not nursing them a huge amount, but they're still nursing them. Okay? They're still giving them milk from their breast while they're still breastfeeding 2 others. Okay? Not uncommon. Something that we're not experienced with in our culture, but in other cultures certainly is still being done, and it's still done in Africa to this day. Okay? So that's not at all uncommon. No, there was one, and it was called Mother. Yeah. So, let's see. What things am I missing out here? We did the sharks, and we did the. No, she was in her home. So Moses was raised in an Israelite household until he was past weaning. And then when he was past weaning, was taken back to Pharaoh, and that's when she named the child. Okay? Now, naming of the child. When you bring the child into your home, that's when you named him. Okay? So she named the child at that time Moses. Okay? What does Moses mean? Yeah, Mo is the Egyptian word for water. Usis is rescue. So he was rescued from the water. Is there anything vague about that for us? Yeah. We are all rescued from the water. Okay? The water is what gives us the life. And the other thing is all those pharaohs' names. All the pharaohs that came after him, Amos, Thurmos, Ramos, all those. They're ending words, ending with a Mose, M-O-S-E, and means they were out of the water. They were son. So son of water. Okay? That was a big deal because the water was what brought life and the son out of water. So he was rescued from the water, and the alliteration of the Hebrew word out of and the rescued from the water all came out of the Egyptian. So the combination of the 2 words in Hebrew and Egyptian made it so that he was rescued out of the water, and he was a son of the water. And interestingly enough, Moses was rescued from certain death out of the water. We are rescued from certain death out of the water. I like that. So Moses was told a story of Jesus before Jesus was ever born. Jesus was coming to rescue us out of the water, bring us life from death. Yep. People. Nope, we came out of water, and we came out of water again. First birth and our second birth. That's to keep us from the second death. New life. Perfect. So this is the first 10 verses of this chapter, and what happens right after this. Yay for Moses, he kills an Egyptian. Man, always full of murder. And that was the way that those things sort of got started. Interesting. I don't know how Pharaoh's daughter presented her son to Pharaoh, because she hadn't been pregnant. How would you do that? Apparently, it would have been okay in those days, just like some people think it's okay today, to have a child and not be wed, and have a child and hide it. So she presented him as her own son. Not anything different. But the timing of all this stuff is still a controversy. If you look at the biblical turn of events from Solomon when he built the temple, he said it was 480 years after they came out of Egypt that Solomon built the temple. And we know when Solomon built the temple, and we go back, and that doesn't match up with anything we know about the Egyptian pharaohs. We can't really put him together with the right pharaoh. That's because the Egyptian histories are not really well recorded and kept. They still have other things to discover, so it may not be Ramses II. That everybody says it's Ramses II because that's the one of 1270 BC, but it could have been 1470 BC. I don't know. Bottom line is, it really doesn't matter. Moses did it. Moses brought them out and had them wander around in the desert for 40 years, and then he got to see him go across from Nebo and died. Moses had his time. Moses, perhaps, is the second most important man born at that time in the world. I mean, think about the religions that continue to follow after the Ten Commandments. Think about how it related to bringing Israel all the way to the time of Christ and protecting the childbirth up to the point of Jesus' birth. And then subsequently, there's still a whole lot of people following after Mosaical law and the rabbis and the teaching. If you look, the Grecians and the Romans took a lot of the Hebrew teaching and made part of it their way of learning. And classical education was taught using a method that the Hebrews brought forward in learning language and math and dialectic, so that you could debate and question and worry out and ward out all of the answers. It was important to be able to get grammar and math and composition together. Without those three, there was no hope. So Moses was drawn out of the water, and he brought forth with him a Hebrew education from the time of his birth until he was given back to his Pharaoh mother, And in the Pharaoh's household, he learned all that was available at the time. All that was available at the time. And at that time, there probably wasn't any higher center for learning than there was in Egypt. They had all of the diviners and soothsayers, and they had all the mathematicians. If you look at all the math that was done by the Egyptians to construct the pyramids and the statues, the things that they did, the cantilevers, the cantilever bridges, they did all of those things long before Greece. So there was a huge amount that Moses had available to learn, and as second to none, he learned it all before he was found in trouble by killing an Egyptian and then running away to stay in Midian. So Moses had 3 women in his life. Jochebed, his mother, who protected him until she finished breastfeeding him. Pharaoh's daughter, who took him in and made him like a son and kept him in the household of Pharaoh until he left. And then he went to Midian, where he met and married his wife and stayed in Midian for 40 years. So three different women for Moses that gave him the most experience in the world. That's it. Okay. Huh? Absolutely. He stayed with Israelites, and no doubt. I mean, your most formative years for your brain development are 0 to 5. Okay, that's when your brain develops the most and the quickest. And learning morals at home, you learn those in the first 5 years. Now you can gain others, but they're law. They're not inside. So that's where he had those inside. Yeah. No. When by the time you're 15, you've pretty much got concrete around your heart. What you're going to get. I have. We haven't done it yet, but I have every reason to believe that we're going to try to get a prayer vigil together for the congregation before the elections. We need to have a prayer vigil for this congregation before the elections so that we can pray about that. But we've got a lot of other things to pray about. We've got a lot of sick people to pray about. We've got a lot of growing yet to do in this congregation. We've got a lot of things about our budget that we need to get done about this congregation. We got Laura Bennett with the new work in the children's ministry, and we've got some other things that are on the plate. So we plan on having a vigil. We haven't discussed it yet in the elders as a whole, but I have every reason to believe that we're such a praying congregation that it'll be a rubber stamp. I have every reason to believe that'll happen. I'm going to ask for us to do a fasting with it. You remember what Jesus said? Jesus said, only by prayer and fasting does such as this come out. There are a lot of demons in this world. There are a lot of demons in this country. Okay? And we need to keep as many of that stuff away from this congregation as possible. Fasting. It's a outmoded behavior. Nobody does it anymore. But I think if it was important enough for Jesus to tell his disciples, only this way do these things come out, maybe we ought to pay a little more attention to that. I hope that we do a fast along with our prayer. A morning to evening fast is not going to kill us. A morning to evening fast will make us stronger if we put our time and effort into prayer. I'm sharing that here. Hadn't been done yet by the eldership, but I have every reason to believe that it will be. So, go with me to the Father. Father in heaven, we thank you for this wonderful day. What a beautiful fall day that you've given us. The great change in weather and the relief from the heat that we've had this summer. And Father, we're so thankful to see things that are put into motion by your hand. Father, we know that you are still at work, that you're still painting the canvas, that we are just your servants, ready to be used in any way you want us to. Help us, Father, to be useful for the congregation. Help us to be useful in the world. Help us to be that light that we show to all other cities around us. Help us to be good for our brothers and sisters of the congregation, but for those who have not found Jesus yet, help us to be the way, the path. Help us to be the way, because that's what you wanted Jesus to do, is come and show the way, and we are to pick up that cross and follow it. Thank you, Father, for loving us. Thank you for caring for us. Thank you for Patrick and his lesson today. It was a great lesson, and we thank you, Father, for how it touches us. Help us to be better servants day by day. Keep us always closer to you, Jesus. And in all these things we praise you.